Kallee, thank you so much for joining us. For those of you who don't know who Kallee is, we're just going to quickly introduce her. I met her for the second time in the US, first time here in South Africa with the IFAJ Congress that was held in Pretoria and Cape Town. And Kallee is actually one of the most awarded people I know in the business. And also now focusing for this part, or the largest part of your career in the audio world. But you do have your roots in printed, right?
I do.
Okay, awesome. So what we would like to know, and we've chatted about this before, is that when you do make that connection with audio, although you're a print journalist, you can actually use that to enhance whatever you're writing. And especially when you're publishing digitally, which most publications do anyway, you can actually add so much value for your reader, for your media consumer on the other side. So this is what we're going to talk about, but also podcasts, and that is to broaden your scope of skills. So Kallee, over to you. Maybe you can just also give us a little bit of background what you do every day for a living.
Yeah, so, well, as you said, I did start out in newspapers. My first job as a journalist was in a 6-day-a-week regional newspaper in Queensland in Australia over here. But I had trained in radio. Audio has always been a real passion of mine, but I loved my days in print because you learn how to make quick decisions and put out a lot of content quickly, which in a digital age is even more important. And it really, I think, set me up to transition into audio really well. So I've spent time as a rural reporter, as they're called in the ABC, which means I had a radio program of my own, focused on agricultural issues for my part of the world, which included a mix of Q&A style interviews, so just reporter and talent question and answer, what we call radio packages, which are multiple voices and sort of narration from myself, and also a lot of live broadcasting as well. So a real mix of audio elements. And nowadays I'm a radio producer, so my job is to assist my team and my presenter to get the most out of the sounds that we can deliver for our audience as well. One of the things I find most powerful about sound is that it can get into somebody's brain in a way that words and images, I think, sometimes don't. There is a real power to speaking directly to somebody. And good radio makes you feel like that person is talking directly to you. And I think as a broadcaster, that is the real power of our medium, that we can talk directly to our audiences, and it's really engaging when they feel like they're being spoken to directly.
I think we can all ascribe to that. That's actually the dream. If you want to communicate, is to do it as directly as possible. But we have to talk about the technical side as well, because I think that's the daunting part. If you don't really understand how the medium works, or where the pitfalls are on a technical side, you are more likely not to do it and not to even give it a try. So let's just start from the basics. What is a podcast, and in what format is it distributed normally?
So a podcast can take on very many forms, but essentially what it is a audio story. And they can be fictional, non-fictional, they can be news-focused, they can be interviews. Essentially, it is radio, like any radio station program you might listen to, but it's on demand. So, and it's often made purely just for podcasting, not necessarily for radio. So it's the power in them and the popularity in them is that they can be downloaded and you can listen to them when you're mowing the lawn or in your car at a time that suits you. Whereas radio traditionally happens, you know, your breakfast show might happen from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. And if you're not listening during that time, you miss what was said. So podcasts are basically radio on demand, but the format, the medium has evolved to the point that they are now a medium of their own right. So there are things that you can do in podcasting that you could never have done in radio. Obviously, you can't take phone calls, for example, in a podcast, but the really powerful ones have really great audio engineering. That is, they have really nice soundscapes, really high quality recording. They quite often have a narrative. If they're newsy, even if they're two comedians talking to one another, even if they're a true crime podcast, which is one of the biggest genres of podcast getting around, they have a narrative, a beginning, a middle, and an end, not only to each individual episode, but then also quite often to seasons of those episodes. So similar to like a television program, but it's audio only. Does that sort of explain them? Oh, and then how are they distributed? So there are multiple platforms for people to distribute podcasts. You can start a podcast and put it up on your website alone, depending on what kind of website traffic you have. That'll determine how many people get an opportunity to listen to it. The most podcasts are streamed through services like Apple Music and Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and they have a stable of podcasts that are all inside their production house, and they produce multiple podcasts, much like a television channel would produce multiple television programs, and then they have their own distribution channels as well.
In your experience now, Australians and South Africans often think they have a lot in common when it comes to farming and agriculture, but you guys have to drive a long way to get anywhere.
Yeah.
We might think 500 k's is a long way, and then you will laugh at us.
I'm still in my listening area.
Exactly. So podcasts for listening in on the road, is that a popular thing for?
It's on the road. Increasingly, it's smart devices, so your Alexa or your Google Home. It fills that gap that radio fills as well, which is that background listening. So the real thing you have to be aware of when people are listening is they're quite often doing two things at once. They'll be listening and cooking dinner, or they'll be listening and driving. So if you want to really engage, my goal as a radio producer is to create the kind of content where you're driving along in your car, you have to pull over to hear the rest of it because you're just so engaged with the material. So you are a background medium. So it's really important to use the tools you have, which are different sounds, to continually re-engage people. So it is one of those things that people will listen to them at the gym rather than watching. The good thing is you can listen to this sort of stuff and you don't have to have your eyes engaged. So it's, better than, say, watching a television. I can't watch television and run on a treadmill. I will fall off it. So you can listen to podcasts and do that. And they can be various length. One of the most successful podcasts in Australia is called Conversations. It's a podcast based off a 1 hour radio program in which the host, Richard Feidler, interviews somebody about the scope of their life. Beginning, middle and end, goes for an hour. It is the #1 podcast in Australia.
For an hour?
Other podcasts, an hour.
And people pay attention for an hour? People
pay attention, yeah.
Wow.
But then there are other podcasts that are 5 minutes long. Or there's one called, one that we produce at the ABC called America If You're Listening. There was also a previous season of it called Russia If You're Listening. And they're about 15, 20 minutes long. So depending on the pool, Conversations had a huge radio audience before it became a podcast. So it wasn't a difficult idea to sell. Starting from scratch with an hour-long interview, you might really sort of struggle to hold listeners all the way to the end. But they can be, if it's compelling enough, they can be of various lengths.
So we've touched on it now in what you said, and that is to identify that engaging angle. That's really have that hook. If you don't have that, then it's sort of just up in the air. Nobody's listening. What has been, talking about angles, one of the most successful ones, if we just talk about agriculture, that you've recently seen that's really taken off?
So I think probably in agriculture, it's the stuff that really works. So you look at, so we have a program called Landline. It's an incredibly popular television program, and they produce a podcast, which is so their program goes for an hour. Most of the stories are 7 to 12 minutes long, and they do a cut down version of that for their podcast. Those stories, the stories that really work for agricultural audiences, are personal stories. So it's a bit of a meet the maker kind of story. I know as technical agriculture reporters, we get really excited about things like soil. Like, I love a soil story. But if your goal is to engage an audience beyond agriculture and thereby tell the story of this industry to people who don't already know it, the personal stories are the ones that sell. So they're the ones where it's 3 generations of the same family working on the farm. It's the innovation. It's the people overcoming challenges. It's the tales of the farmers who provide that food. People are essentially looking for that connection. It's like the connection they get at a farmer's market if they get to meet the maker and talk to them about their hens and talk to them about their pigs, or, you know, get that opportunity to see how passionate the farmer is. Those are the stories that will engage and connect with people. Because if you think about audio, it's a really personal medium. So I don't get to see what you look like. I just hear your voice and your passion through the sounds. And so the same stories resonate really well. And the direct pleasure that farmers get from feeding people or clothing people or providing housing for people. And those are the stories that will resonate with an audience beyond agriculture. The other end of that spectrum is if you go into a hyper technical type area, you can get a really niche audience in a hyper scientific field. So if you are doing a science-based podcast and it already has a science-based audience, then going into the technicalities of how things are done and the innovations in agriculture, then that will work in that sort of audience. But if you're looking for a broad beyond agriculture audience, it's the personal stories that will get you across the line and of interest to those people.
Okay, so let's take this back a bit. Baby steps, please, for us print journalists. I'm writing a story, but I'm also having an interview with this really, really interesting bloke. And he's got this regional accent and he's just liquid gold in your ears. Okay, so you want to also bring over this feeling that you had when you were there, that engagement with the subject, or sheep bleating in the background, just to give people sort of that feeling. To have a sound bite, is that something that you see more and more happening with printed versions, and also click here for Koos's response to when I asked how are things going, and then maybe add this really outrageous response to that. Is that something that you see happening more and more?
Yeah, so we've started doing something at the ABC called segmenting, which is taking some of our best interviews and making them available online, so people can listen to the actual response. It's particularly important in a world where context and nuance in news is becoming less and less recognised. I've been a print journal, I've sent text out and people misunderstood or not picked up on the tone of that text. So it is increasingly important to have our talent use their own voices for transparency in our industry, if nothing else. And people do find it. I found making that transition from print to radio is really difficult sometimes to get across the emotion of somebody. You're talking to someone who may have just lost their entire crop to a hailstorm, and the quotes can read really dry. But when you hear the break in his voice, when you hear the big pause, when you know that he's just trying to hold it together and he just breathes out the words he can, that really conveys to the audience how serious the situation is. Whereas the quotes can be easy to move past, and they can be really challenging to, particularly in a daily news type sense, convey that emotion. So increasingly people are using audio and even using it on social media as well as a hook to get people to read more. So you have, there's an app I'll introduce you to later that everyone can use called Headliner, where I'm able to put a little bit of audio into a Facebook post, and then you can link that to your article. You can listen to them. Yeah, so you can listen to the moment that Harry Jones realised he would not be getting his crop off this year, and to find out why, read more. So they get the opportunity to listen to Harry's heartfelt response, and when they want to know the context of that, they click the link and go and read more. So that's how it can be a really powerful, we call them calls to action, really powerful incentive to, like, what is this bloke talking about? I need to understand more of this. And particularly if you use social media as a key distribution strategy, which most media organisations do these days, or newsletters, which are increasingly popular as well. We've been using photos in our newsletters with a little play button. When they click that play button, it takes them to the audio, and we found that to be a successful strategy as well.
Yes, awesome. I actually love this because we're blending media like never before. Eh?
Well,
Oh, I love it.
our audiences don't tell the difference between us. We have a policy of being where our audience is. They don't know the difference between a print journalist and a video journalist. And increasingly, there is no difference anyway in organizations where no one has any money and everybody's got to do everything. But the audience, if you're always thinking about coming to it from, like my mum has no understanding of the media. So I always have her in my mind of like, if she wanted to hear this story, how could she get it? Because she's not like me. She doesn't know how to click on all the links in the ABC's website. So that's how I always think of her as my listener. How do I get this to her? And they don't know the difference between a print journo and an audio journo or a video journo. They just want the story in its purest form. Quite technical, and there's a lot of numbers, and people are going to need time to digest it. Print's your best friend in that position. If it's really dramatic images, then you turn to video. Having that skill set to be able to tell the story in the medium that suits it most is super good insurance in a changing media landscape.
Okay, so I'm going to compound a few of the questions that we prepared. So we've really covered, producing that absolutely, and it's not about winning awards. When I'm saying award-winning podcast or soundbite, I'm really looking at making your media user the winner. If they enjoy it, they will come back. If they come back, you have a bigger audience. And then from there on, we can finally get you making more money. But okay, fine. Is it necessary to direct people? Some farmers, especially here, you will get one or two that's really, they're comfortable in front of a camera or in front of a microphone, but others rarely even want to be interviewed. How much of direction goes into producing a podcast or sound bites that will support your written article?
It can be really challenging. I tend to find, what will really help you in this regard is what we call a pre-interview. So if you know you're going to record something and your talent is a little bit microphone shy, and we get that quite a lot. I mean, my microphone is pretty intimidating, right? And I shove it right in your face. So I have a couple of tools I use to sort of calm people down when they're confronted with a microphone. The first one is I tell them, I'm only interested in what you know. I'm not interested in anything you don't know. So there's not going to be a question that you don't know the answer to. So first of all, stop worrying, you won't know. I'm only interested in what you know. I find that particularly for older farmers, that can be really powerful because they worry about looking foolish in front of their industry and in front of their friends. And you tell them it's going to go on the Country Hour in my case or in the newspaper, and they're worried that, their colleagues are going to give them a ribbing when they head to the sheds next week. So first of all, I let them know that I'm only interested in making them look good. And often what I say is, look, I want to look good. And the way I look good is when I make you look good. And then they realize I'm very invested in this transaction. I give them instructions. I tell them I'm going to move the microphone. Don't worry about it. Don't try to chase it. Just keep looking at me. This is me monitoring sound. It's got nothing to do with you. It's recorded. My superpower is editing. We both sound amazing at the end of this. Trust me. And that will quite often put people at ease because they've never been through it before. I don't want to think about how many interviews I've done. They've never done it before, quite often. Or they've done it and it's been a bad experience, which is even harder to overcome. So sometimes it's in the chat before. My number one piece of advice is start your recorder early. Don't press go as you put the microphone in their face. I will often start recording, whether I'm using my recorder or my phone, I start early. I start as I get out of the car. Now, it is important that people understand why you're there and that you're there to record them. They need to have that for transparency, but I'll let them know. And it allows me to capture the sounds of the farm, the greeting when we introduce each other to one another, which is often really powerful in storytelling with audio. It allows me to capture our little pre-chat. So I won't use that for broadcast. I quite often will only broadcast from when I say, this is the recording for broadcast now. But all of that is background for me to sort of set up in my mind the type of story we're telling. And I will have a chat with them off microphone, so how's the season going? What's your dog's name? Get all that get them comfortable in that moment.
But linking up with this is having that ambient noise that you can sometimes bring in, the sounds of the farm or the industry where you're at or the new tractor launch, whatever. Is that something that you use often?
Very often. And like good design in a newspaper, you shouldn't be able to notice it, but it should enhance your experience. So it's like when you're picking your front page image, you'll have options. You'll have a wide shot of a scene. You might have a midway shot of a scene. So let's say we're talking about a car crash. You might have a full shot of the whole image, the whole car crash, the full streetscape. You might have a mid-up shot of the two cars head to head. You'll have wide sounds, and they will be the birds in the trees, there'll be the ocean in the background, there'll be the wind in the grass, the cows mooing in the background. They're all your wide sounds. Your midway sound is the voices, the things that, you know, we're talking together. And then you have close-up sounds. So it'll be the sound of the chain as you open the gate, the key in the ignition of the tractor, the sound of the chainsaw getting started. Much like you would pick the shot to tell the story on the front page of your paper, you pick the sound to tell the story. So if I'm doing a package and I'm talking about, you know, my narration might start with a scene. I'm driving up the driveway to Harry Jones's farm. I have to, you know, drive over the cattle grid, open the gate, and I'm greeted by his dogs. I should have sounds that tell that story. You won't notice them, but they'll enhance your engagement. So you'll hear as I say, I'm driving up the driveway, you'll hear the tires on the road. You'll hear me run over the cattle grid because I will have started my recorder in the car with me. You'll hear me get out of the car, the door shut. You'll hear the dogs approach me. All of that will happen under my narration. It's actually really easy to edit, and it'll all immediately do the most powerful thing that audio can do, which is put you in the car next to me, put you on the farm next to me. That's what audio can do that the other mediums can't do. It can sit you in the center of the story just like I am. And that's those little sounds, you know, are the things that will transport your audience and keep them engaged for longer.
So you've mentioned that editing is your superpower.
Yeah, I've done a lot of it.
Editing software, are there easy ones for the newbies to use?
There are. There's free ones, which is even better.
Ah, yes.
So, I mean, if you want to get super serious, there are packages like Adobe Audition, which is quite well known. And the beautiful thing about packages like that is that they have a lot of support and lots of tutorial videos and things like that. And if you're familiar with Adobe Photoshop or Premiere Pro, the video making software, you might find Audition is very similar, and therefore that language might really work for you. If you've never used anything before, there is a free program called Audacity. It's Audicity, that is a very straightforward editor. So there's two types of editing that you can do. So there's waveform editing, which is just, you know, the voices that we've recorded, just editing those voices. And then there's multi-tracking, which is where I have my voices in a waveform, and then I have those sounds underneath. And, you know, much like you would do video and audio, it's 2 layers of audio, and then you can push them in together and the whole sound comes together to give the audience that feeling. Audacity is very straightforward to use. The other options are in the Mac suite. Now, Mac has GarageBand, but that's a music production software. I wouldn't try using that. There's another program I've used previously called Fusion. I think it's called Fusion. I'll send you a list with the names so you can distribute it. Awesome. My recommendations. But Audacity was the one I started using at university, and I still have it on my computer for if things get a little wild. The program we use at the ABC is an ABC specific program, so it's of no use to anyone else. But I switch between Audacity and Adobe Audition. What I would say about audio is it's very much like photo editing in that if you haven't got it in the field, you're not going to get it in the studio. If you don't capture the sounds when you're out in the field, you're not going to be able to replicate them in the studio. If you have a bad recording in the field, there's very little you can do about it once you get it back to the studio. It's really important to have a plan going in and monitor. I think people are a bit over it now that we've all got Zoom, but I've met lots of young journalists who don't like to wear headphones because I think they look silly. I guarantee you, if you're not listening to your audio as you record it, you will have failures and they will break your heart because quite often you can't recreate those moments. And so it comes down to really good listening in the field that will help you edit in the studio. And so editing, editing is one of those things you get better with at time. You get faster at it the more you do it. When you first start, the temptation is to edit everything. And I would say the power of the medium is the voice of the talent. So, and I have lots of farmers who and take really big pauses, mumble a little bit, repeat themselves. The number one thing is that they get a sense of that person. And so you edit for inaccuracy at first, you edit for stumbles, you might have a repeat. I would quite often say, let me just start that again, set myself and repeat my question. So you might edit some of those out, but don't try to do too much at first. Let them have their voice. That's the whole point of the medium. Let them have their voice. They're doing the work for you. I edit myself really heavily. I edit my talent quite lightly.
Okay, well, that is maybe a lesson we should all learn. I just want to remind the people who are now looking at this video, if you have questions, send it. We have it on the Participate platform that you can send in questions. And Kallee, hopefully, I know it will be very late at night for you, but maybe we can look at actually answering those questions live. Otherwise, sending it to you, if you don't mind, we will curate it, that it's not like a deluge of 20 questions, maybe just 3 or 4 of the big ones, so that we can communicate it back to our members.
More than happy to.
You've now touched on equipment as well, and you've shown us your big fluffy microphone. Again, starting up, you probably won't have something like that. But no. I did notice in America that you had this very nifty attachment to your phone, and that seemed to be working excellently.
Where is that? I wish I had that with me. Yes, so the most powerful tool in your kit is your smartphone. So I use an Apple phone, but lots of my colleagues use Android or other sort of based phones. They are very good at recording. Just Saturday, I recorded an entire interview that went to broadcast with this alone, no microphone, no nothing. You can get microphones that attach to the bottom of the iPhone. Mine is the one that I use is called a Rode XY, and it has a two-direction microphone. So the microphone sort of sits like this, and one points at the talent and one points at me, and I can just hold it in between us and it captures the sound. Microphones, the important thing about microphones is they will always enhance the quality of your recording. And the other thing is when you're starting out, they can mitigate some of the problems you might face in the field as well. So there's 2 types of microphones, omnidirectional and unidirectional. Omnidirectionals record a huge soundscape like this around the microphone. Unidirectionals record wherever the microphone is pointed. You want a unidirectional because then you're in control of the sound. And essentially, if you're buying one from a music supply store or somewhere like that, they'll be able to talk you through it. If you're looking at podcasting, Rode has some really good podcasting microphones that go straight into your computer. The microphones we use at work are called Sennheisers. Microphones can be very expensive. They're always worth the money. This is also my best friend. This is called a dead kitten. And it is a windsock. So you can get windsocks that are this sort of foamy type windsock. They're fine. I prefer these furry ones. So what happens is the wind comes in, gets caught in all these hairs and dissipates. So you don't get that wind sound across the top of your microphone. I've used this in some shocking environments and the sounds come out really nicely. So to get started, really all you need is a phone with a recording app. You can even edit audio on your phone. If you're doing it on your iPad, the app I would recommend is called Twisted Wave. Costs about 15 Australian dollars. I don't know what that is in your money, which is not a huge investment, but you can do a really good level of editing in Twisted Wave on a phone or on a iPad, and then you can send that audio back to your computer or wherever you would put it to upload or publish it. The other tool that's really valuable for recording on your phone is it's an iRig. So it's IRIG. There are other adapters that allow you to plug microphones directly into your iPhone. If you're wanting to go into the field of getting your own actual recorder, which is, I mean, you talk about award winning, and I know we're not here to talk about that, but I have won radio awards with recordings on my phone. So, and in fact, I had a editor at the ABC who was adamant that the phones were not high enough quality, who thought that that award-winning package had been recorded on a standalone recorder, and it had not. So with the right microphone and the right environment and a bit of planning on your behalf, your phone is all you need. But they have lots of really great options in terms, if you're getting really serious, in terms of being able to record in the field and things like that. The downside to them is you can't, they don't have the internet, so you can't send audio back, whereas I can record in the field with this. I can actually go direct to my studio using a proprietary app we have with my phone. So increasingly, you'll find reporters are using their phones. And then to record phone interviews at home, which we've had to do during COVID, I've been using this device, which is called a Mix Pre. And it basically allows me to plug my telephone into one side and my microphone into the other side, and it works like a radio studio from home. I have no idea how much that costs. So there are levels. Don't be afraid to get started with just your phone. If you are going to use your phone and you're listening with headphones, be wary that phones with earbuds with microphones in them will interfere with the microphone plugged into your phone. So it's a real trap for new players. So don't be tempted to use your Bluetooth or your earbuds that come, your phone earbuds that come with your phone. You want plain ones that have no microphone, because of the way phones work, they switch to whichever microphone is getting the audio. So when you speak, that microphone will overtake the recording. So the iRigs I talk about allow you to plug in a separate set of headphones. So those are that's really all you need to get started, is a phone, a decent set of headphones, and if you can afford it, a good microphone you can plug into your phone. And then Twisted Wave on your phone. You don't even need a computer, you're set. The only other thing I would say about recording, and this is something that really sort of I learned the very hard way, is about monitoring levels. So this is the app I use. It's called Report It. You can get a free version of it. We have an ABC version of it so that it can go directly to my studio. So what you'll see here, as I'm speaking, you'll see that little green line jumping up and down. That's my level. So green is good. If I were to record my voice right now, it'd come in at a really nice level. This is my fader, which allows me to increase the level and increase the volume that's being recorded. If I go too far, you'll start to see it hitting that red zone. I think you can see that red zone. Once it hits that sort of yellow to red zone, you're going to start to have effects on your voice. So you can always make things louder in the studio. You can't make them quieter. Stick in the green and you'll be fine. That's a really critical thing, because people don't realize that about recording, is that, and when you get it back and we call it topping out, you can hear that crackle at the top of the sound. It's because it's been too loud in the field. And that's why you've got to listen or watch your levels all the time. But yeah, if you do those things, if you have a bit of a plan of the sounds you want, you watch your levels while you're recording, you have a decent microphone, or this in a non-windy environment. I will sometimes also do this if I don't have my microphone. Sometimes just shove the sock on the end of the phone because that's where the microphone is. So you don't really, you can kind of get away with that.
Yeah, no, that's a great hack, eh?
If you get caught on the run, because sometimes, I've got my phone in my handbag or whatever and I don't have my microphone, but I can just shove a sock on the end and then that'll cut out some of the wind. But those are the critical things. You want to listen for those background noises. If it's windy, use a sock somehow, and watch those levels all the time, because once you get back into the studio, you'll be able to make it louder to a point. You will not be able to make it quieter if it's got that topping out audio at the top. But it is, that makes it sound intimidating, but it's actually pretty straightforward.
Well, I think we've reached our limit for time, but yes, this was enlightening. I love it.
I really love audio, and I love anyone having a go at it.
I'm going to have a go at it.
And the thing I would say too is be yourself. When you're recording and you're doing interviews and you get enthusiastic, or if you have a little mistake, don't be afraid to be yourself either, because the audience engages with you too. And some of the best radio I've heard is technically not perfect, but is really genuine and authentic. And that's what you can tell. Audiences can tell straight away if something's not authentic. So even if it's technically not perfect, it can still be the best radio getting around if it's authentic.
Kallee, thank you so much. This was absolutely a blast. I love it. Thank you for phoning in from Australia all the way. I'll be having a Bundaberg ginger beer on you. And be on the lookout for some questions. We have our event. We have our event on the 13th. So that will be broadcast live from a studio. But this session will also play just slightly before that to give our members a bit of a boost to really
good on you guys for
like your own skill.
Yeah, and good on you guys for keeping up with that stuff. Yeah.
No, you really have to invest in yourself as well, eh?
Increasingly, we're finding that in journalism in general. You know, you never know which way the worm's going to turn, and the more skills you have, the more. I mean, I remember when I was first learning, my one of my lecturers said to me, they got asked once if they knew where a particular place was, and they lied and said no, so they could get sent on the job, because otherwise you don't get the job. And I've always sort of taken that approach with, like, I will say yes and work out the skills later. I know I can take this on. But any way you can reach your audience. Our audiences are so fragmented, they're overwhelmed with content. Ultimately, if you can use a medium that speaks to them, literally, you're getting another opportunity to share that story. And that's what we do this for, to share the stories, to give people a picture of what their world is really like and the things that they may not know about that they probably care about. So any chance you get to tell your story in any medium, good on you for learning the skills and embracing that and pushing forward with that, particularly in difficult times. Nobody's got any money. Everybody's struggling, and you guys are still out there telling other people's stories. And I think that's really powerful and really necessary.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate your time.
My pleasure.
Thanks,
Have a great
Kallee.
event.
Bye-bye.
Bye.